Welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and thank you so much, as always, for joining us. So just appreciate you being with us so much. It means a great deal to me. What I want to do this week is I want to talk about some of the various groups of nations that we see today. It's interesting. Nations are constantly joining together in different groups. So we have the EU, we have NATO, but we have some really interesting groupings of nations or alliances that are called like the G7, the G10. There are these groups of nations. Just for instance, today, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the meeting of the G7, the group of seven. They met in Italy. And that's an annual meeting of world leaders to discuss various global issues. That group has to do primarily with politics. For a little while, there was a group called the G8. Russia joined the G7 in 1998, but they were kicked out in 2014 when they invaded Crimea. So the G8 went back to being the G7. There's another group of Latin American, African, and Asian nations called the G15. There's another group called the G20 that was founded in 1999. It's more about finances and the economy. In fact, the G20 nations represent 85% of the global economy. There's another group called the G24. And many people may not be aware of the fact that in 1964, there was a group formed called the G77. So there's all kinds of these groups out there that are the G7, G15, and so on. Now, I believe the Bible tells us that the Antichrist is going to rise out of what I call the G10, the group of 10. This G10, this group of 10, is referred to several times in Bible prophecy. I think it's in Daniel 2, Daniel chapter 7, Revelation 13, Revelation 17. I'll read those scriptures and discuss those later. But I believe it's out of this G10 that the Antichrist will rise. It's going to be a reunited Roman Empire in the future, I believe. He's going to rise from that grouping of nations. So what I want to talk about on today's program is who is this G10, or what is this G10 grouping of nations? Now, in just a bit, we're going to go to the subscriber-only section, and I'm going to answer some questions that have been sent in. Let me just give you a preview of these questions. One question is, what kind of role will a housewife have during the millennium? If we all have roles during this time, according to what we do here on earth, what kind of role would a mother or a housewife have? Another question is, many people are being saved and baptized weekly in Lebanon. Most of the new believers, formerly Islamic, have two wives. They have children with their two wives and their family. What does this new believer do? Do they leave and abandon one of the wives and children and take only one wife? Or do both wives, or keep both wives and love and cherish and honor his family in his new faith? The entire family's been saved, but the dilemma is, what does this new man of God do with both wives? Another question, when children are raptured and with new bodies, do they continue to age and grow during the millennial period, or do they remain the same age? Another question, do you believe in near-death experiences and that these people actually go to heaven and return? And then finally, what are your thoughts on Matthew 22, 23 to 30, when Jesus talks about a woman who'd been married 7 times? Which of her 7 husbands would she be as one with in heaven? So those are some great questions we have for today to answer. But again, what I want to talk about today is this G10, or this group of 10. Bible prophecy teachers for decades have wondered about this group of 10, this group of 10 nations that will arise in the end times. Now, let me go to Scripture and just mention some scriptures that I believe talk about this future group of 10. I think the first place it's mentioned is in Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 to 44. Remember, in Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, has a dream. And he sees a great statue, and it's made of 4 different kinds of metal. There's the head is gold, which represents Babylon, that empire. The chest and arms are silver, which represents the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persians. The belly and the thighs are brass, which pictures the Greek Empire. And then the legs are of iron. And then the feet and the 10 toes are of iron and clay mixed together. And Daniel gives the interpretation of that the head of gold is Babylon. Then there'll be another kingdom. We know that it was the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persians, that overtook Babylon. Then Greece overtakes Medo-Persia, and Rome overtakes Greece. But there's this final form of the Roman Empire that's pictured by these 10 toes of iron and clay. And in Daniel chapter 2, verse 41, he says, just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so will this be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. So strength and weakness kind of together. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. Then the next verse says, in the days of those kings, God's going to set up a kingdom that will never end. Christ will set up a kingdom. You say, well, who are those kings? Well, those kings are represented by those 10 toes. So this is the first indication we have that there's going to be a group of 10 that's going to arise in the end times out of the old Roman Empire. Then you go to Daniel chapter 7. It's kind of a parallel passage, I believe, with Daniel 2. There, Daniel sees 4 great beasts. So it's not 4 different metals on a great statue or an image, but it's 4 beasts. And in Daniel chapter 7, verse 23 to 25, he describes that 4th beast. So the first beast, remember the first was a lion. That again is Babylon. You have a bear, that's Medo-Persia. You have a leopard, that's the Greek Empire. Then you have this beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. It goes on in Daniel 7, verse 23, to describe for us and define this 4th beast. It says, he gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on earth. That was the Roman Empire. It will be different from all the other kingdoms, will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. But then it says 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. Now, this never happened in the Roman Empire before at any time in its past. So we believe this has to be future. After them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High, oppress his holy people, try to change the set times and the laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a time, times, and half a time, or 3.5 years. So what we have here is 10 horns that represent 10 kings that are going to arise. And then 1 little horn is going to come up among them, and he's going to subdue 3 of those kings, and he's going to take over that kingdom. Now, going forward, again, I'll talk about what this all means here in just a moment. But in Revelation 13, the chapter about the final Antichrist, you have a beast there with 10 horns. The Antichrist rises out of that. And then in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12, John has seen a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, just like back in Daniel 7. But it says, the 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who've not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings with the beast, with the Antichrist. They have one purpose and will give their power and their authority to the beast. So people have wondered over the years, Bible teachers have, what is this? Who are these 10 horns? What is this G10 or group of 10 in the end times? Some have surmised it would be 10 regions of the world, that the world will be divided in the end time into 10 different regions, and there will be leaders of these 10 regions. So that'll be this group of 10. Others believed for many years it would be 10 nations. And when the EU began to be formed, actually the beginnings of the EU back in the 1950s, they thought, 6 nations were originally joined together, and they thought it's going to get to be 10 nations, and those 10 nations will be this group of 10. Well, the problem is the European Union was formed, and there's 27 nations in that today. So I think the better interpretation is this group of 10 in the end times that the Antichrist will rise from is a group of 10 leaders or 10 individuals. It's not 10 regions of the world. It's not 10 nations. They're 10 leaders. One of the reasons I say that is you have these 10 horns, and a little horn comes up among them. And that little horn is the Antichrist, and he's referred to in the following context by personal pronouns. He speaks blasphemies against God, and he's enraged against the people of God. Well, if that little horn is an individual, it makes sense to me that the other 10 horns are individuals as well. So what the Bible predicts, I believe, is there's going to be a reuniting in the end times of a Roman Empire, a final form of the Roman Empire that's ruled over by 10 leaders. That's never existed in history before, so it has to be future. And so what I think we're going to see at some point of time in the EU, and other nations may be involved in this as well, I think the EU is just kind of an embryonic form of this, that we'll see 10 leaders begin to arise in the EU. Now, it's interesting, right now in the European Union, they're having a meeting here and just very soon, and Reuters has a headline that says, what are the EU's top jobs and how will they be filled? So in the European Union, they have several high-ranking positions. One of them is the European Commission President. One of them is the European Council President. And one of them is the Foreign Policy Chief. And there's going to be an EU summit in Brussels on June 28th and 29th when they're going to try to hammer out and figure out who these officials will be. Now, I don't believe what we see today is the fulfillment of these prophecies in the book of Daniel. I do believe that we see these things coming together, and I think the EU is the beginnings of this. So what I think will happen at some point in the future after the rapture takes place, there's going to be a lot of chaos in the world. People are going to be, shifting around and moving to try to figure out how to make things work. And there's going to be a reuniting of the Roman Empire, the old Roman Empire, and it's going to happen under 10 leaders who are going to seize control and seize authority there. I think what we see in the EU today is the precursor to that. It says these 10 leaders here rule over an area that's some of it's strong and some of it's kind of weak. And that's kind of what you see in the EU today, stronger nations, weaker nations who are together. These 10 leaders will rule over them, that at some point in time, an 11th one will come up, and he's going to be the final Antichrist. He's going to subdue 3 of these kings. 3 of them are evidently going to try to kind of, be against his taking authority. They're going to resist him. He's going to uproot them. And then he's ultimately going to be the one who's going to take authority over this reunited empire, use that kind of as his base. And ultimately he'll take control and rule over the entire world. But all these G's that we see today, the G7, the G15, the G20, all these different groups, I think, are paving the way for an ultimate G10, a group of 10. We're going to come on the scene in the end times. The Antichrist will rise from outside that group. And Daniel 9:26 tells us that the Antichrist will arise from the same people who destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in 70 A.D. And we know, of course, that was the Romans. I don't think that means the Antichrist will necessarily be Italian, but he'll rise out of the old Roman Empire. So the 10 toes in Daniel chapter 2, the 10 horns in Daniel chapter 7, the 10 horns in Revelation 13, the 10 horns in Revelation 17, they all speak of the same thing. This group of 10 that's coming, that'll pave the way for the coming of the Antichrist who's going to rule the world. So all these groupings we see today of nations and leaders are paving the way for the ultimate coming of the final Antichrist. Well, as always, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to go now into the subscriber-only section where I'm going to answer those questions we mentioned earlier. Some great questions this week. And if you're not a subscriber, you'd like to be one, you can go to endtimes.com and sign up there for $7 a month. And I think that'll be an investment that you'll consider to be very worthwhile. So we'll go into that subscriber-only section now and answer these great questions.